All right. Lizzie, are you ready to go?
Slowly preparing. Yep, good to go.
All right. I'll call this meeting of the Board of Education Instruction Work Group to order. Today is May 1st, 2023. We start by approving minutes. I move that the minutes from the Instruction Work Group meeting dated April 3rd, 2023. I move to approve the minutes from the Instruction Work Group meeting dated April 3rd, 2023.
Recording in progress.
Second.
Second, Board Member Nichols. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 7-0. I think Maya said aye.
Oh, okay.
Yes, aye.
Okay. All right, we'll now hear our health services update.
We also had one person sign up online for public comment, but I don't see them on here yet, just so you know.
You see them on there. You want to let them know?
Yep.
We'll let them comment.
Mhm.
Thank you, Jesse.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I am at the Leopold Vaccine Clinic tonight. This is our last vaccine clinic that we're holding for this season. So I'm really excited about that. The vaccine clinic goes until 7 o'clock tonight. For my update, we found out this is fresh news, but Dawn Sobranic, who has been a long-term school nurse for Madison School District, was awarded the Wisconsin School Nurse Administrator of the Year award last Friday. And Dawn is instrumental in almost everything that we do, always in the background of what we're doing. And it's so fitting for the work that I'm going to share with you tonight, because her hands were all over the program development, the data collection, the really heart of what we do in our department. And I'm so proud that she is being recognized for that. So I just wanted to give that recognition to Dawn for all the hard work that she's done. We have been looking at some of our data, although the numbers will go up a little bit. But as you know, last Friday was the last day of our testing vendor in site at our school district. So Accelerated Clinical Labs ended their testing in schools program with us. And so now we do have rapid antigen testing available in our health offices, and we have lots of home rapid antigen tests to hand out. But so far, our best data that we have is we have done just about 54,000 COVID tests since September of 2021 through March of 2023 at our school district, which is just quite impressive. Dawn was actually the one that first got us started. We were doing rapid antigen testing in our schools before many, many other school districts were doing them. So great appreciation for Dawn for that. And then as I sit here at our vaccine clinic, I am sure we are over 4,200 COVID doses that we've administered throughout our vaccine clinics in our Madison School District. So really proud of that work. We are still working to kind of define, we're getting more information from Public Health Madison-Dane County and DHS. They both sent out information last week, kind of clarifying what the end of this emergency meeting comes. And so we are dissecting, asking lots of questions to try to figure out what our next steps are going to be for how we continue moving forward without the emergency funding. So that is it for my update.
Thank you so much for that update. Board members, do you have any questions in regards to our health update? All right. Thank you so much. Sorry, Board Member Nichols.
Thank you. Carrie, thank you so much for the update. There's a nice section in your memo around the school-based health centers, and I was just wondering if you could just give a little voice to some of that promising work moving forward.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. So we are moving forward with our school-based health center work. We have 2.0 of the 4.0 FTE hired for our mental health therapists. We continue in partnership with UW behavioral health to support that. We have started our advisory committee. We are breaking out into a work group to work on our medical and physical health piece of what that could potentially look like for us at MMSD. So lots of exciting work that is happening a lot in conjunction with many of our community partners.
Great, thank you.
Leah, I'm not sure if you have anything.
Nope, I just didn't want you to have to take it alone if you didn't want to. Thank you.
Any other questions or discussion from board members? Board member, I'm gonna say. Listener Feldman.
Feldman,
Oh,
you're good.
okay, I'm gonna work on it.
It's okay. I usually don't say anything.
We'll get
Okay.
there.
I just asked if everyone can hear me. Do I need to unmute?
No.
No? Okay. I'm curious, when you talk about the school-based health centers and looking at mental health and physical health stuff, how are you connecting with the instructional stuff? Because it's my belief that mental health for students needs to include thinking about the curriculum and the workload and the pacing and that kind of stuff. So I'm wondering if on your advisory committee, there are people who are connected with the instructional universe and how that's going, or how you imagine that could go.
I don't have the list right in front of me, but I appreciate that feedback and we'll share that with the team. I think you're spot on in the importance of situating our mental health work at the most universal level in our classrooms, as that being like the first level of support for students. We'll take a look at the membership there and we'll address that concern if it is an issue with the membership right now. So thank you.
Thanks.
All right, if there's any other question or discussion from board members, then we're gonna move on to kind of the larger portion of tonight's agenda.
Our public comments on?
Public comment
You
is
ready?
back, all right.
Yep.
So before we do that, we'll hear from public comment.
Yep, our public comment is.
Okay. Board member Pearson, we'll hear from you and then we'll go to public comment.
Yeah, sorry. I just can't turn on my camera right now. So you can't really see me very well. So I was just gonna ask just how this is going to fit with us approving to not end the mandate for vaccines. And then like when are we looking to update our mandate with the information that is readily available? And I don't know if that's a question to us as a board or if that's a question that needs to be answered by Nurse Carey and the team.
I can just share that we have a metrics meeting tomorrow where we will be revisiting the vaccination mandate and with the board's desires as at the forefront, working with our colleagues in other industry, like at UW Health, for example, to figure out how to make a vaccine mandate have a longer lifespan that doesn't just depend on what is like the product at the moment. So like, for example, Pfizer and Moderna are no longer the suggested first dose. And so we need to update that to make the policy more timeless. So we will be able to report back on that to the board in the coming weeks.
Board member Pearson, do you have other questions or discussion?
No, thank you. That answered my question. Yep.
All right, Dell, I think we're ready to hear from you. I'm sorry, board member.
I have one more there. I love that. I'm just looking, were you right about the really super exciting and just awesome partnership with the School of Psychology, the UW School Psychs? And I'm wondering, to me, this is super cool for a lot of reasons, what you listed here, but also you've got people who are going to be coming in, training in our schools, to hopefully work in our schools at a time when they know these are hard positions to fill. And I'm wondering if you've given any thought to how you can use this opportunity to learn more about what makes people want to work in MMSD, since I know HR is a major sort of focus, and making sure they can recruit, retain people going forward.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great thought. And that grant, in addition to some other work that we're doing, will sort of coalesce in many respects. So we are seeking as a department to understand why staff stay and why staff leave, in particular, our staff of color in student services. So we are working with are going to be working with a consultant group in order to conduct those focus group conversations and have a better understanding of what the needs are in the field and in today's world, so that we can recruit and maintain, because that grant with the university is only as good as who we can recruit to be in the program. So we're definitely trying to get upstream in terms of thinking about how do we get folks here in MMSD and trying multiple strategies in order to diversify that effort.
Thank you.
If there's no further discussion or questions from board members regarding the health services update, we'll hear from public comment.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Belle, thank you for joining us.
PI 25 clearly places accountability on you as our Board of Education. As you engage in this review, I'm asking you to examine each year's accountability data since our plan's inception in 2016. This provides a framework of where we started, how far we've come, and how far we need to go. Is there evidence our plan is actually meeting the needs of the students, parents, and our community, or simply an exercise in compliance? At this time of budget challenges, what is the cost benefit of our PI 25 investment? As I reviewed the slides for tonight's presentation, I continue to have concerns why our PI 25 response is limited to 5th through 12th grade. Why doesn't our plan extend accountability for early childhood through 4th grade as highlighted in the Children at Risk guidance? On the definition slide, I'm interested in hearing the reasoning behind why the "and" separating 8th grade achievement and promotion was edited to read "and/or." Is this an opportunity to consider the consequences of social promotion? On the school voice slide, I read your plan is grounded in a multi-tiered system of support. The continuous improvement slide calls for strategic academic support. How do we reconcile these statements when the WestEd evaluators did not find evidence of a high-functioning MTSS in our district? They did find evidence of a weak core instructional program and concluded it is nearly impossible to implement a high-quality service delivery model in the absence of MTSS. Chapter 118 gives the Board of Education the responsibility for students achieving the ability to read, write, and spell to enable children to learn by reading, listening, and communicating by writing and speaking. Wisconsin standards for English language arts state for students to be career and college ready, they must be proficient in reading and writing complex informational and technical text. Wisconsin reading standards state the expectation that each student meets grade-specific standards. Wisconsin Association of School Boards believe that school boards should require students being promoted to higher grades to achieve a specified level of competency in reading and language arts. This association also supports a high school diploma representing a specified level of competency in reading and writing. Your association and legislative leaders support local school board control for determining the levels of literacy required to meet graduation standards. The decisions are yours to make. As you consider a renewal of our PI 25 plan and promotion and graduation policies, I'm asking you to think about how literacy achievement could be reflected in our framework. Documentaries supporting literacy as a human right include testimonies from adults who suffered the anxiety and trauma of moving through FAPE as an illiterate learner. I'm asking you to consider illiteracy as a possible root cause for PI 25 identification. Why can't a commitment to literacy be included in our school level collaborative approach and our future work statements? Science nor statutes support promotion or graduation without literacy. The track, created by offering diplomas despite illiteracy, leads to nowhere. No scholar should be encouraged to accept this choice. Let's not limit our accountability to graduation rates, but embrace a covenant of getting everyone ready, which includes literacy for all identified PI 25 scholars.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're gonna move on now to the academic plan update. So the first thing we'll hear is our on track to graduation plan, and then we'll hear about our co-curriculars. We'll have a break in between those two in order to discuss each, and then we'll also hear about graduation projection update, and a review of the board's policy related to graduation. Turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Board Member Muldrow. Good evening, everybody. I'm really looking forward to having a conversation around the items that were just outlined and thinking about the policy implications for each one of these, as well as the potential budgetary implications that we may foresee. For the first agenda item, PI 25, we want to use tonight to really get input from the board before we get to a place of bringing forth.
Can you talk just a little bit louder? People online can't hear you.
So tonight we would like to have a conversation as well as provide an opportunity for the board to give input on our PI 25 plan before it comes back to the board in July for its annual vote. I'm excited tonight that we have some school-based colleagues here, as well as our team, to share a little bit about where we currently are with our plan, what we're learning, and what we're thinking about for next steps. So I'm going to invite my colleagues to join me at the table for this presentation. So we have Laura Glob, who is in student and staff supports, who is our lead social worker. We have Kelly, who is our social worker from Capitol High. Dr. Hicks, who will be representing middle schools, and Victor O, who is our principal on Capitol High, if you all want to join the table up here. And then online, we have Patrice Hutchins, who is the assistant principal at East High School, and we have Dr. Caroline Racine Gillis. So I'll give everyone a minute to come to the table. And Jessica, would you please advance the slides?
All the way forward.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm going to also invite Dr. Nate to the table. And I'm just giving everyone a minute around the table to get situated. And then we will go on. You can go to the next slide, please, Jesse. So just a reminder, PI 25 is state required. And last year we came to you and we rejected the language that the state used, which is at risk of not graduating, and shifted our language to on track to graduation. We know that that is symbolic, but we also believe that that's critically important in terms of how we think about the supports for our students. I'm going to ask Dr. Caroline Racine Gillis to come on, and she's going to walk through the next few slides. We'll go to the next slide.
Great. Thank you so much, Cindy and board members. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. In terms of background, our state required PI 25 on track to graduation plan requires us to identify students for inclusion in the plan on a yearly basis and communicate to families in a written format, as well as to annually renew the district level plan. We can go to the next slide, Jesse. Inclusion in the plan is defined by state statute to mean students in grades 5. So rising 6th grade, we have lagging indicators that we account for. So it's actually rising 6th graders through 12th grade plus who have dropped out or have 2 or more of the following criteria. Here are some recent revisions that were approved in the plan for this year. As Cindy previously mentioned, we updated the language. We re-emphasized the importance of grounding the work within a tiered support structure. We articulated the school level collaborative approach with families to co-construct a personalized graduation plan. And we emphasized the importance of leveraging existing plans and relationships. We heard you last year and we wanted to better understand, as you all wanted to better understand how this was enacted at the individual school level. And as Cindy said already, we're excited to have school voice in this presentation towards the end. So with that, I'll turn it over to Cindy in terms of walking us through the data.
Thank you. Before I walk through the data, I just want to kind of uplift what we heard from the public speaker, that this, while is a compliance driven requirement at the state level, we have continuously tried to figure out how to operationalize this plan. That is just part of the way we do school, knowing that the support students need, whether identified in this plan or in other ways, are things that we are constantly thinking about and looking at for continuous improvement. And also what we're doing at the earlier grades, specifically the early literacy and beyond work that will hopefully impact the data that you see in front of you in a different way moving forward. So I'm just going to orient you to this slide real quick. So we have multiple years of data here that show students that were originally identified based on one of those or more of the criterion that Caroline just walked us through, to be on a watch list of students that may not be on track for graduation. In the below yellow bar, you will see the number of students that were exited off that list based on improvements in those areas, as well as making progress throughout their time. You'll notice that 2 years show much lower numbers, and those were the years where one, we did not have forward testing due to COVID, and then the following year we had about half of the participation rates, if you may remember, due to an optional kind of testing approach because of some of the continual COVID issues and things that were coming about. I'm trying to think of the word. And what you will see at the end is the data from last year. So we use a year-end data that, as a reminder, then identifies students for the following year for supports. You will not see that yellow bar yet because we are in progress right now of providing supports for students. And you will also note, and I'll show you on the next slide, that those numbers have increased since before. Go to the next slide, please. So what we decided to do was try and break out the data that you just saw on the previous slide by criteria. So what are the things that are identifying students to be identified as potentially not on track for graduation? So one, we have 1 or more years behind their age group and their high school credit, so credit attainment. We have 2 or more years behind their age group in basic skills, and that's identified as literacy and or math. We have habitual truancy, a student that may be pregnant or parenting teen, students that have been adjudicated youth, and then 8th graders who scored below basic on the state mandated test, and then were identified for 8th grade non-promotion through our current policy. We're going to talk a little later about, we're going to talk a little later about some specifics that we have noticed around habitual truancy. Just to provide context, habitual truancy is students that have 5 or more unexcused absences within a semester. We also have another identifier that we talk a lot about at the federal level, which is chronic absenteeism. And a reminder, chronic absenteeism can be excused or unexcused, and that's students that fall below the 90th percentile. But this particular indicator is about habitual truancy. Can you go to the next slide, please? Thank you. And so the next slide here actually shows where we are with our high school completion rates. So I think it's important to note that when we've come to you before and we've talked about students that have been identified as potentially not on track to graduation, that isn't always the full story. And we also know that there are other students that may also either be not on track for graduation for other criteria. And then the supports we provide all of these students to actually graduate and the goal of graduating college, career, community ready. And overall, we're seeing that we have an upward trajectory in terms of our graduation rates. We definitely have work to do when you disaggregate that data. But I wanted to make sure we also saw where we are with our current graduation rate. A reminder, this is lagging data, meaning this is last year's graduation that you will see as the most recent data on this slide, which is the 21-22. You go to the next slide, please. Thank you. And this next slide also shows our high school completion rates over the last few years, with last year being the most recent data, but some intersectionality. Now, board, if you remember, we talked about this in some detail on Friday when we had our retreat, but I wanted to re-present this data, not only for you, but also for the community to show where we are starting to see success and also where we recognize we have areas of improvement to do. And again, high school completion really focuses most on graduation requirements, which later on tonight, I'm really excited. We're going to talk to you about what that means in terms of our presentation. Go to the next slide, please. So at this time, I'd love to turn it over to Laura Glob, and she is going to talk about some of the work that is happening to date around attendance. Recognizing this is not just a local issue, but definitely a national issue. So I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Thanks for having me, everyone. I could talk about attendance for hours. So as you know, we're seeing a nationwide issue around chronic absenteeism. When students are missing school, this is a signal where students and families might need additional support. So here at the top, our current work, we have some highlighted individual schools that are implementing universal practices as well as individual support. So just a few highlights. And as a district, we have representation on Judge Everett Mitchell's and Truancy and Dane County committee, knowing that this is not occurring in our district, but in our community. So a wraparound approach with our community. As we continue to work collaboratively to disrupt the nationwide concern, we have been able to build on a few partnerships in the future work that have strategies to identify barriers and build personalized attendance support plans for students and families.
You go to the next slide, please, Justin. Before I invite our schools to share a little bit about how they are approaching this work, I wanted to talk about some things that came up actually from a board member recently and thinking about some of these plans that we have that are partial requirements and compliance and how we start to make better connections between these plans so that we're actually making improved outcomes. So what you'll see is when we think about ESSA, right, which is the federal designation and the federal plan we're held accountable to, ATSI and TSI schools are an example. That is really a system level approach that we need to think about in terms of outcomes for all students. And then how we're thinking about PI 25 is the connection to that is then what are we doing for individual students? Laura just talked a little bit about attendance, and we know attendance is individualized. Every student and every family has a story in terms of what is going on in regards to attending or not attending. And we also know if students are not in school, they are not able to learn. So we really want to think about what those individual supports are. So that's how we're thinking about the two plans connected together, system level and then individual. And with that, I would love to invite first Patrice Hutchins. She's our Zoomie for the night to talk a little bit about the work that's happening at East High School and how they are thinking about this plan and what they're doing to really support our scholars. So Jesse, I don't know if Patrice is on.
I'm here.
Oh, yay, there you go. I'm going to turn it over to you, Patrice.
Awesome, thank you. Good evening, everyone. So at East, we have really worked hard to include this work not as just something that we needed like a checkbox, but how are we including it in everything that we're doing? So it starts with our SSIT, our student services intervention team that's meeting weekly. We try to identify trusted adults for the students who are identified on the on track list. And we also then work with case managers, ESL advisors, 504 coordinators to ensure that the person that is assigned to the student isn't just somebody that's going to meet with them once, but it's really going to be intentional work that continues throughout the year so that there's consistent support. We also try to be really intentional about reaching out to families prior to the letters going home. So it's not just like this letter, like what does this mean, that we're talking with families and students about like what supports can be offered, you know, where their student is at, and how we are going to help them at East. We also are really intentional about sending out additional information beyond just the letter. So we'll include our academic supports that we offer, whether that's homework club, you know, different opportunities for students to get involved. We also send out ways for clubs and groups, knowing that if we are involving students in other positive pieces, that can also impact things like attendance and feeling like they belong at school. And so we try to be really intentional there. I would say one place that we really dig into is also our students who come in ninth grade, since we haven't had them a lot, you know, the previous year. So looking back at this can be an opportunity for us to look back at transition data that we would get to allow us to see maybe where we can dig into some targeted interventions that we don't know or we didn't have set up in place. So whether that's just in terms of like reading or literacy, things like that, we're able to talk more about that and work intentionally with our ninth grade team around student supports there. So those are some of the things that we're doing at East. We really want to use this as a way to kind of like come back to when we're talking with students. So whether that, like, again, like as we continue to meet around student data in SSIT, that it's not just something that we talk about in the beginning of the year and we're done with it, that that we're continuing to support and to help students make sure that they are meeting, that they are improving and meeting student goals. So that's what we got from East.
Thank you so much. We want to provide another perspective, and so Victor, the principal at Capitol High, and Kelly, the social worker at Capitol High, are going to share a little bit about how they are supporting students and thinking about the movements.
Right, thank you. My name is Victor Chuda, the principal at Capitol High, all 3 locations, East, West, Safe Park. Just want to start off by saying thank the board for allowing me to talk with you. Opportunity kind of let you all know some of the things that we do to support students at Capitol. And we understand the task in front of us is not an easy one, but it's definitely one that is truly fulfilling. Some of the things that we do to help with the attendance, we start with the student-led attendance support plan, in which our students lead with the student support staff. And we come up with resources to help them with certain things that they need, whether it is bus tickets, using a small portion of the budget for taxi rides, and also utilizing the student van in times that we deem necessary. Outside of daily student check-ins, we also incorporate the family team meetings, communications with the families, anywhere from daily or weekly, depending on the need. Finding opportunities to get in contact with our parents through family nights, the mailer, school blast. We find ways to help our students, our most challenging students, come up with a plan to complete the academic year, whether it's through night school, keeping in contact with the instructors, even sometimes in very limited situations, bringing instruction to them, giving the students something to look forward to, partnering with career programs, and doing a great job with the student support team with post-secondary planning. So some ways to keep our students involved, focusing on the attendance. Again, it's not isolated work, it's not independent work, but it is the foundation for the work that we do. I'm not going to steal my social worker shine, so I am going to pass it on to Kelly, but I just want to let you all know that the work is being done, and we will see the results of the work.
I'm Kelly, I'm a school social worker at Capitol High. I typically support the east side and our parenting site. In front of the machine learners. When we think about contract or what we kind of deemed it as here in the district, there's a right? We know that that's coming from outside the Capitol, like in most aspects of our work there, we try to really personalize things for most students coming to Capitol. That is the plan, right? We were able to meet, talk with families in August and September about what's worked, what hasn't worked, what are your needs, what are your barriers, how can we best support you to grow and do our best. Something that is looking at the state of the state, what are things look like in the past, why were those barriers for you? And then we do really frequent check-ins around those things. Either when family is interested in that, when student is specifically interested in that, or when we start to notice some of those things. Being a small site and we have a small but mighty student services team, we're able to really notice when it's students, right? When there's a grade dip, when something in the instruction just not jiving or they're not doing well with instructing, right? We have a lot of extra assumptions for instructors, right? So again, it's a small school and right now it's for buildings of 6 classrooms. But we're able to do a lot of adjustments. And then we come back together during our November conferences and really touch on here's where we're at, where are you feeling like you're at, where's your family and your support system feeling like you're at, how you can progress monitor. And our social work team really looks each month where are things at, how are students doing, what are we seeing, what are we noticing. We have March conferences as well at Capitol, so we do again kind of a mid-year check, and then we spend the remainder of the year really trying to individualize which supports, talking about summer as a needed option, whether that's just for keeping that support and consistency. The students that come to Capitol really come looking for their people and they sometimes not felt comfortable or welcome in those other spaces, and sometimes we gotta build the pyramid, right? So we gotta find a really good solid foundation. Most of our students that come do have at least one of the barriers, so we don't always have kids come off the list, but they make progress and they get to it.
And then Dr. Hicks is just gonna share a little bit about what's happening.
So, thank you for having me, board members. Much of what, the high schools talk about, occurs in the middle school as well. But approaching it also too from a more, so, academic, lens, we, also really intentionally leverage our win time, which is what I need now. Our schools have that time to be able to focus in on what students need for learning and making sure that we're meeting their needs in that space that's outside of core instruction. Also, we do leverage our tutoring in school and after school, as well as building capacity with families in order to support, in order to connect them to support services in the community. Really being intentional and wrapping around all parts of the child and the family in a way that they can support.
Yes, you can go to the next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit here just about our next steps and then I'm moving forward to your discussion. We are pulling together what we call a short-term cross-functional team this month throughout December with our school-based folks to really think about what has been going well so far. How can we think about supports and differently? Understanding post-COVID, we're definitely seeing some certain trends, especially around that attendance piece. So we really wanted to focus on that. We also will be taking your input that comes tonight and throughout the rest of the month to incorporate that into a revised plan that will come to you in July for approval and vote. I think some of the things we're thinking about of implications that some of our policies may have related to this plan. One example is the promotion policy, which is 35-37. I know we're in the process of talking about policies, so I would look at that. And then we're still thinking about what additional academic and attendance supports are needed. We know at middle school, we just thanks to the board had an approval of new literacy materials. So we're really excited about that as a foundational component for focusing on improvement in proficiency. We're still sticking with the science of reading for our teachers. With our new literacy materials at the elementary level as well. We believe those are foundational components. And we also want to think about what else we may need to include in our plan to ensure we're continuously improving our outcomes for students. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Board Member Mojo, and
Thank you so much. Me and Cindy talked a little bit about the best ways that board members can contribute to this conversation or move this conversation forward. Nikki, I've seen your hand up, so I assume you've got questions. I'm gonna ask folks to separate kind of questions and comments and direct their questions at specific members of the team. And to hold off on comments or have comments come after questions for this evening's round. And Maya, because I can't see you, if anybody notices that Maya's hands up, like, oh, flag me, thank you. So I see Board Member Vanderbilt and then Board Member Nichols. Board Member Castro.
Hello, my question is mainly, do we automatically ask our students who have an IEP for dyslexia, do we automatically make sure that they are, that people are aware so they can get targeted support?
Yes, so any student would qualify under the area of specific learning disability if they are identified as a person with dyslexia by a school team. And any student that is receiving special education services under the category of specific learning disability is always being provided a reading intervention. So it's actually a requirement that's tied to being served under that category, regardless of grade level. They will be provided an intervention in the area of reading, and it will be specific to their disability related needs, because those can be in fluency, they can be in the phonemic awareness, they can be in writing, and so they would be provided interventions that are targeted to their specifically identified disability related needs within that category of specific learning disability in the area of reading. Does that answer your question, Board Member Vanderbilt?
It answers that question, and then I just have one more.
Can I add one clarifying piece, Nancy? I just want to make sure that doesn't necessarily mean that they are identified for PI 25 on to the on track to graduation. That's
Correct.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Okay,
Right.
that,
Correct. Yeah, so right, so my response was in relation to, we would always be providing an intervention for that scholar, but right, they wouldn't necessarily show up because they might not meet those criteria.
right.
Just because they have a specific learning disability in the area of reading, right? Absolutely, thank you.
And my next question is for Cindy. I see the 64% graduation rate in disability, and I know it's gone up. And I get that. And I understand that we have extended years, and I understand that too. But 64% is still lower than I'd like to see. What strategies do we have to help raise that level?
Yes, thank you for that question, Nikki. Right, that is only showing 4 years, and as we know, our scholars with an IEP have up to 7 years, and we look at the multiple years of graduation data, we see better progress there. But I would say the strategy that we need to do is the strategy we need to do for all students. We need to do a better job of having monitoring systems in place to ensure our students are supported. Thinking about if our students are graduating via a portfolio or via Carnegie Credit Union units, how we are wrapping around students, giving them the support they need. I think Capitol High talked a lot about how their insurance students are doing well with their academics and their college and career. So those are areas that we are continuously focusing on. And I know Nancy's team is working in partnership with us on that to ensure that that data improves over time. We recognize that it's improved, but not where we need it.
Thank you. That concludes my question.
Thank you, Board Member Vanderbilt and Board Member Nichols.
Yes, thank you. So I'm gonna just say that I need a moment just to reorient, particularly around the criterion for a student to be put on this plan. So slide 8 says that students in grades 5 through 12, although I know we can also look at younger students as well, but let me just say what's on the slide. Slides grades 5 through 12 who have dropped out or have 2 or more of the following, right? Okay, so if you have one of those items, one of those issues like being more than 2 years behind peers of their same age group and basic skills, you wouldn't necessarily end up on the plan. Okay, so you have to have 2 or more. So when I go to slide 11, I think this is where it gets murky for me. Because as you show the data by criteria, it's showing the number of students who met that one criteria, but not necessarily both. And so then when we talk about the students who then were exited, it's hard for me to understand exactly like how much progress we're actually making. Because you could have a student who perhaps their attendance got better, but the other criteria, like they're still behind in skills, was not fulfilled. And so can you just help speak to like, how are we actually talking about progress towards those student outcomes?
Yeah, so I will share kind of high level of how that looks, and then I will turn it over to Patrice and or Kelly and Victor to talk through the school level. We have a data system that has every student that is identified and indicates for each individual what the criterion is for them to be on that. So if for that individual is habitual truancy and is the 2 years below academic skills, those are the 2 things that the plan is being built around, and that is how we are monitoring progress. So there is some intersectionality between that. What you are not seeing is like.
Yeah, people on YouTube can't hear you. I'm sorry. Yeah.
I mean, my thing's on.
They're gonna hear you.
Yeah, it's gonna be this one in the ceiling, so you might just have to project a little more.
Okay.
Thank you.
Usually I have the louder, you all know, usually I have the loudest voice. Okay, I apologize.
Jessica, you can put slide 11 up so everybody can be on the same page.
Sure.
Let's see it.
And I apologize, Zoomies. So I'm just gonna step back for a second, and we have a system, a database that provides individual information on every student that is identified on this list, and it indicates what their 2 criterion, and it could be more than 2, but usually the 2 criterion in terms of how they wound up on this watch list, if you will, and where and how students have come off of that. So we monitor that. So there is data that shows the intersection between that and how we are able to see the areas that we're doing better in and where we're making progress, both individually and system level. You don't have that data in front of you right now, but that data exists. And that is also how each of our schools is building out their individualized plan for students. So that's kind of big picture. I'll turn it over to see if Patrice or Kelly want to answer more specifically how they're thinking about that, and also where they might be seeing progress in terms of students that have exited from it, as well as potential areas of improvement. So Kelly, maybe you want to start while we see if Patrice wants to chime in.
Just need to go to the slide now.
Okay. So I was just, I'm a social worker, so I'm saying things that I know that I'm not. I don't know, construction is definitely one. And at Capital, I do think we often, a lot of our students don't come off the list because we don't own credit the same way towards graduation. And because we are a shorter day, we can gain as many credits in a year or semester. So often if students come to us with that credit deficient flag, that won't parenting, which is called SAFER, is also under capital high size, and once you have your baby, ideally, right? You have your baby, you are still a parent. But because we are small and have been able to be agile and continue to build over time, we have been able to still be more hands-on and have some students. And try to layer in things, right? Maybe attendance is the focus this year, and you come off the list, but we still know what you are missing, right? And we want students to know all their information so they can make the best decisions, because capital is not always where they stay. So we want to make sure they're in the best position to leave us as well. So we don't ignore those things. We want to make sure that they're able to pick back up on credits, so that they're able to catch back on their instruction, have more individualized supports and opportunities for their opportunity.
I know Patrice was also going to chime in. So let's see what she wants to do.
Patrice?
Yes.
Interested in chiming in and responding to board member Nichols' question?
Yeah, so I think one of the pieces, when we get the specific data that we try to be intentional about at schools is also like really tailoring it to like we're working together as teams. So it's not, even though there might be a point person, it's not necessarily just one person working with a student. And so how are we really being mindful of like what the criteria is? How are we collaborating on this? How are we bring students back to problem solve as larger teams? And again, like one of the nice pieces with our 9th grade on track teams is that we're also meeting with teachers. So we're able to be intentional about like, maybe this is a student that came up with an SSIT. And then in another meeting, we're able to talk with the 9th grade teachers about what has been happening or what data we have with students. How are we monitoring and like, how are we looking at what's happening in the classroom? One piece that we also do is we do regular data. We dig in with the data just in terms of like where students are in terms of like, are they passing their classes, where we're regularly looking at attendance and different pieces there. So that is also helping us to consistently come back to this on-track data and connect around it. So it's not just like one area living in isolation. When we get those two pieces, a lot of them are playing off of each other and working together, right? If you have a student who consistently is habitually truant, there is probably like an understanding of why they might be behind in some of their basic skills. So how are we working together and also teaming with staff to understand the needs of the students and welcoming them in and supporting them?
Thank you, Principal Hutchins. Board member Nichols, additional questions?
Yeah, I'm just gonna do a follow. First of all, Kelly and Trace, thank you so much. It's very helpful to hear what you're doing inside the school every day with students that doesn't necessarily show up in the data slides that I see. My additional follow-up question is, you all spoke quite a bit tonight about attendance. And I heard you reference that in the kind of return back to person from COVID, you're starting to see a trend. And I'm assuming that's gonna something will come forward to the board as a recommendation in the near future around that. Is that why we're highlighting attendance? I guess I'm looking at you.
Yeah.
Cindy.
I was just gonna talk up, so people can hear me.
Okay.
Yeah. So I am not sure yet what that recommendation would be. Laura mentioned we just started a great opportunity with DPI and Graduate Alliance that is really focused on tier 2 attendance supports. DPI has used their own ESSER funds to capture the first 10,000 students in the state that might need this resource, and they started with the big 5. So it's one area that we're really leveraging a resource for them. Our village builders, as a reminder, at the middle school level, at our 6 ATSI schools, we believe they are a key lever for this as well. I think there's some policy implications that we may want to consider. And I think that's part of what this kind of short-term cross-functional team is going to look at. And then I think we want to hear from the schools more in terms of their other things to take into consideration that have budgetary implications that we just need to consider. I think the one piece about attendance that we are learning, and Laura could speak to this more, is it is so individualized, and every student and every family has a story for that. We're hearing its basic needs such as clean clothes, its transportation, as Victor mentioned. So it is a really big umbrella, and thinking about how our schools are supporting that. We want attendance teams to be put in place next year, because we know right now it's heavily relying on social workers and they cannot do it all. So we're thinking about attendance teams. So that's a lot to say, Board Member Nichols, that I don't know yet what we will bring forth until we have some further conversations with our school teams. And hear what we might also be missing in terms of things to consider. And I will turn it to Dr. Jenkins, because I think he was going to share.
No, I think you covered it very well. I'm just gonna wait on Laura to go into the whole patient insurance piece, which we are going to be making a policy recommendation to be talking about as well. The residual of the pandemic, before the pandemic, that you went into the terms of the marginalized most of the population, some of the individual issues.
Yeah, I think when we talk about attendance, it's not to just talk about habitual truancy, but chronic absenteeism. I think that's us with the county, with Judge Everett Mitchell's committee. We really want to rebrand Dane County Schools to not just look at habitual truancy, which is unexcused absences, and just kind of emphasizes like compliance, as well as like the track to legal and administrative solutions, but chronic absenteeism. So excused absences, unexcused absences, suspensions, how are we looking at attendance as a whole? Because we notice that emphasizes academic impact of missed days, right? So we're missing school from that. And that then uses a community-based and positive strategies, like the tier system that we're working with DPI as well as nonprofit attendance works. So like really think about the strategies that are individualized for each student and family, as well as universal approach for every school.
The last thing I will say that we're digging into is I think attendance and what attendance means post-pandemic is also different, which is why that policy is so important. Virtual opportunities and mental health, both kind of two different things, have really taken account into what we're seeing in terms of more around the chronic absenteeism. And what students need to be able to check out and decompress, and also how students can still engage in learning when they're not physically there. So we are learning a lot about attendance and what that tipping point or threshold might be based on new information versus pre-pandemic.
I do one follow-up, and I want to be mindful of time for follow-up. Let me just say this really quickly, and then I'll ask my last question. I do want to remind board members that if you go to July 2022, the July regular board meeting, you'll see that we voted that night on an updated plan. And there's a memo in there kind of reminding us all of some of the changes around this okay, so thank you for speaking about what you're seeing post-pandemic around attendance. So let me ask you this. For the criteria that says 2 or more years behind their age group in basic skill levels, when I'm looking at this data, there is a huge jump up in terms of the number of students who would meet that criteria. And my wondering is that also something you're noticing is that a post-pandemic trend? Or how do you explain that? Because it exceeds even where we were prior to the pandemic. So I'm just curious.
I'll start, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hicks to answer, especially from the middle school perspective. I think it's both. I think that we had many students that were not meeting, that criteria pre-pandemic. And the learning loss that took place, post-pandemic, I think has only exacerbated that. I again think why our priority of early literacy and beyond and not, releasing from that is absolutely essential to be one of the factors for changing that. But I will turn it over to Dr. Hicks to see.
So I would add that, yes, it is a trend. Once again, the reality, in my opinion, is that we're gonna have to do some strong intentional work. It's gonna take us some time to dig out of that, to recover. Because when you think about children and the way they learn, and then you think about also being isolated for all of that time, and young people haven't been taught to specifically learn how to learn for application for like knowledge, other than, especially if it's something that is not of like interest. So the way the brain has been retooled for learning has changed, right? And part of that too is that we have to catch up to that and shift around it. So there's a loss. So it works like this. So there was a shock, right? Then they had to learn how to figure out how to learn in that space, right? And some kids did well, some kids did not. And those scholars who were already behind ended up getting further behind because of that trauma that was associated with being in COVID and all the things that came with that. And now as we're coming out of COVID, they've also learned some ways of being or doing or avoiding or interacting or responding that they have to relearn or come back and do something again around that. So yes, both of what Cindy said, and as we think about what needs to occur and how we need to think about it in terms of learning for scholars, we have to have a plan for that, and it's going to take us some time to get out of the space that we're in. We're going to be aggressively having an acceleration around what that looks like and what that plan might be. But it has been a huge impact. And when we think about where a lot of the young people were developmentally when we went into the pandemic, especially our younger babies, it was a real like fall for them in terms of learning. And just to be honest too, you know, our teachers weren't used to teaching in that way either. And so it was like we gotta hurry up and get something together in order to like hold on and keep connections. Some people did it better than others, but it was a learning shift for everybody, and we're all gonna have to try to come out together and put our hands up and get in and identify strategies, practices that will help move our young people forward. But yeah, I'm being honest, it's gonna take some time to recover from the reality of what people experienced and how they are showing up now, based upon it.
So I'll jump in as well. I do echo all the sentiments my colleagues said, but my focus is going to be on what does that plan look like, right? And so, you know, some of us say learning laws, I look at learning in a different way. And so as we look at monitoring, especially at the high school level, credit attainment, you know, we build an individualized learning plan for each individual student. So we got to make the shift in terms of what teaching and learning look like, feel like, and sound like for each one of our students. And so as we look at that and lean into that and couple that with those wraparound services, we can be able to gain traction to close those opportunity gaps in learning. So we are mindful of that. We've watched the data. So we spent this year putting structures in place so that we can start moving our students down the road, especially as it relates to credit attainment.
Board Member Castro.
Thank you so much. I've got two questions. Thanks for showing us these updated figures. I'm wondering, you know, beyond what's been presented, is there a correlative relationship between students who are chronically truant and students who are 2 or more years behind their age group, or 1 year behind their age group in high school credits attained?
Board Member Castro, can I ask who you're directing your questions at?
Well, I guess this is high school. I guess whoever wants to take it if they can.
I'll jump in. In some places, we're seeing that, but there's more work to be done. Just to say, as we looking across the entire district. So one thing, we're just trying to make sure that, to your point, is it isolated or is it across the entire district? And so we're still delving into that as we speak.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I can definitely see it going one way or the other. And then my last question is, I know I've worked and been in a conversation with some social workers who've tried to develop best practices for helping young people who are dealing with chronic truancy. I'm wondering if y'all have identified best practices that we can try to standardize in policy or put more resources behind.
I'll just add to that, and thank you, Mr. Harvey, and thanks for that question. Over my time, because you have chronic absences all across the country, it goes both ways. Those students who have struggled with their early literacy skills and other skills, they're 2 or more years behind. But then you also have the students who are very bored, who don't take the assessments serious that we're talking about, and they're highly, I just say they're way above their peers, but they don't perform like that on some assessments because they're not interested in the assessments. That I think we shouldn't just look for compliance piece of the assessments to determine fullness of the child. And that's why I love when the social workers and the school administrators say we're looking at the whole child, the full team in different perspectives. So it can go both ways.
For your second question, Savion, what schools have seen, so even beyond social workers, I mean, the schools that I highlighted, why they're doing so well is because of the team effort. So social workers might be like the attendance point of contact, but they are the ones that like are leading, there's a team that are coming together. So one, a team effort that is like after school, before school, during school, in the community, with caregivers. That is like a best practice we've seen. And so what we really are advocating for are like foundational practices at every school from a district approach, like cross department. What does those foundational schools look like so that students are feeling positive, feel like they belong, and feel like school, this classroom is where they want to be at? And then tiering it. So what tier 2 supports are we seeing that we need to implement in the school day as well as in the after school? We hear that we do attendance support plans. We hear a lot about basic needs. So transportation, housing, food, all about access, right? And so we can work with our community, we can work with our departments in our district and like meeting those needs. And then the other thing we hear is relationship. We don't have a relationship with either school staff or with that teacher. And so like, what can we do cross department to build those tier 2, tier 3 strategies that are really based on like building relationship, seeing the students gift right where they're at and like building resources on that so students can see themselves as learners, because we all see that. So those foundational practices as well as tier 2, tier 3 and across department in the district, as well as like our community and our nonprofits, as well as the county, creating this approach together.
Okay. Thank you. I guess, is there anything else?
I was just so like what we really with those tiers. So right now our district has like a plan for habitual truancy, but we don't have a plan for like tiers of engagement for access with attendance, right? And so what we've seen with social workers is if we have this universal district practice, then you'll see an increase of attendance, but what it really needs to be is like student and family led. Our students and families know what they need and where they're looking for support, and so if we're actually developing those plans where the student and family is telling us what they need and where they need to get it, then that is really where we can see an increase in attendance and in engagement.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'd be interested in discussing if that tiered engagement should be encoded in policy or what resources we can include in the budget to help the secondary team implement those things district-wide.
Board member.
And
Blair.
that's it.
I'm sorry, board member Castro,
No, sorry, I was saying that's it.
board member Blair.
Thanks. I think just questions, right?
Yes, so questions first, then comments is what I've asked, but
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry. Me questions and comments or all questions and all?
Questions. Then.
Got it. Okay. I just want to say, I really appreciate the challenge, how challenging this is. This is super duper close to the work I do in my day job, and I know that it's really, really hard. So I'm gonna ask questions, but not because I think there should be like easy, obvious answers. So the first is like, there's a presentation here and I'm new to the board, so maybe I'm missing it. Like, is there a linked plan that exists? Or it's changes to the plan from July 2023?
I'll be happy to answer. It is right now. It is right now the plan that is linked from July 2022 that we are going to revise. We will take all of this input and then determine other ways for board members to give additional input and then bring a red line policy, a red line plan to you prior to voting. Moving forward. In the past, we've done through weekly updates, another mechanism for you to give additional written input before you vote in July.
From behind the scenes, I appreciate that. My next question is like, why not early childhood?
Yeah, I'll start with that and then I'll see if Dr. Racine Gillis wants to answer. I don't have a good answer, except we had started with the plan as originally guided by DPI from PI 25. I would say to board member Castro's question, when he said considerations for policy for secondary, I would say 4K-12, because we are seeing attendance, chronic absenteeism, and habitual truancy issues, as well as below basic skills at the elementary level. So I do think that's worth considering. The short answer is we just were going with the plan based on DPI. But Caroline, do you want to add anything different to that?
Yep, within the plan, we address 4K through fourth grade. So the grades that aren't statutorily required in PI 25. And so we address this as prevention efforts. So often looking at common factors in students' lives that may be potential indicators that signal a need for plan of support. So we look at chronic or severe behavior issues or challenges. We look at academic delay in reading or math, or both. We look at the attendance rates and any adverse childhood experience as perceived by the child. And so we also outline a non-exhaustive list of supports and interventions. And so those are all included the plan, and we encourage schools to be monitoring progress of all of our students at whatever grade they are, and work towards a comprehensive individualized plan, depending on their needs in terms of those potential factors that could be impeding a student's progress. So we look early and often at other indicators, and that is within the plan.
Question for school-based peeps. Thank you. Okay. Patrice, oh, I just like felt Patrice was so here. I forgot that she was on Zoom. I'm curious for people who are implementing this work, what are the barriers that you're experiencing in doing the work? Not the student-based barriers, right? Like the basic needs barriers, but in being able to convene a team and being able to stay on that work. What are the barriers that you're finding?
I can start. I think some of the barriers are just the sheer number of students who, whether it's needing a plan or needing support, right? Like, I mean, that in and of itself is the needs are complex, as we've really clearly stated. It's not just a one size fits all. It's really taking the time to get to know students and families and supporting them intentionally. And to do that, you need time, you need resources. Just in terms of talking about listening to Laura talk about habitually like chronic absenteeism and students who are tagged as habitually truant. We have 2.8 social workers at East, and the amount of time that it takes for them not only to have those meetings, but to follow up consistently and continue to do that when students are still, like just needing that support, it's a lot. And so for me, that has been one big piece. Is I think that my team does an amazing job of being really thoughtful with student supports, and it's taxing to be able to, making sure that sometimes we have what a student actually needs. And so I think the other piece would just be around resources in classrooms, knowing that a lot of our students need individualized attention and support, and that can be difficult as class sizes are larger and rise, and that's just the complexity of where we're at in public schools. And so like those are some of the things that come up for us in terms of just making sure that we have, like that we're giving students what they need and really giving them the supports that they need.
I think ours is a big factor for us, but also staffing. In experience, it's been pretty significant. Customers already very small student service team. Currently have 2 social workers. I will be our social worker next year. And a lot of this initial work was here at the exact same time as funding and bringing lunch applications and like everything that starts just finding our needs. And we're also having these conversations, which sometimes feel really heavy initially for families because they're new to us and trust us yet. We haven't reason to yet. And the first thing we're talking about the truth. And that can be really tough and start to build those relationships. Getting data. I used to have access, and I used to have access to district-wide secondary data for students, partially when they were coming to the especially for our students. But I can't compare last year to this year versus anyone where student needs celebrate the changes. I can't compare with grades differently. See what you can see in your time to meet. And that makes it harder to get a better full picture of what they've experienced. Student challenges to making progress in these things to learn.
I would just like to say, from my perspective, one of the things that I see is just time and how to train teachers. And part of my vision of what great instruction looks like in the classroom. That's something that we're definitely going to be intentional and deliberate about next year. Well, not necessarily next year, but starting now. Just getting an idea, trying to be administrator of 3 sites, trying to get the message over at all 3 sites. But it definitely will be advantageous that we are all under the same roof next year. And that will be focused for both us, the principal and myself. The constant walkthrough, the consistent, mentoring, feedback. Those things that we know that the teacher will need in order to develop and kind of implement the vision of what we think great instruction looks like.
I didn't go back and let us go down. You answered your question again about, I was just curious about what kind of barriers. You know, because when I think about this plan, I think obviously about the whole budget picture and the whole staffing picture, and so I'm curious about what are the barriers that you're finding as you attempt to do this really challenging work to support students.
I think the biggest barrier that we're seeing at the middle school level really is the level of trust within the system, right? Even when we're there to support and be in partnership and alongside of the moving with families and scholars, their experiences have not showed them that they should trust, or why would they? And so building that strong, meaningful, authentic relationship, showing that even when it's hard, we're still there to support and not judge, have been some of the barriers. And then just, I'm just gonna keep it, 102 around, the expectations that people have of our scholars, especially our Black and Brown scholars, is they don't expect much. And it is conveyed to them, whether verbally or non-verbally and through their actions. And so then, when you don't expect much of me, I'm going to give you this what you expect. And so those are some of the barriers that I have seen. And then again, it's connected to that sense of belonging and, being seen, valued, affirmed, and part of the community, regardless of who it is.
I have, I think, 2 more questions. The first one is, 3 more questions. The first, no, I'll just do 2. So not, yeah. My first last question is, when we're thinking about some of the stuff that I'm hearing you talk about, and I'm hearing you talk about what students are saying within the individual, I'm thinking a lot about the academic and career planning universe. And I'm wondering, as this plan is in development, if there's any conversation or any how could that be connected? And the reason I ask is because, you brought this up from CAP, right? Like getting students at the high school level, you may have been fired in this way for a long time. You're like, okay, what do I actually want here that makes it worth it for me to go to school beyond compulsory attendance? So I'm curious about if that's, as you develop this plan based on state requirements, if there's any effort towards bridging it. And I'll actually append my second question to this too, which is, has there been any conversation about school calendaring on this? In my experience, one of the things that keeps students out of school is that they're just have to go every day, really, really intensely for 10 weeks. And then there's summer, it's not such a balanced experience for a lot of students. And so I'm wondering if that's been part of the conversation.
So I can start around ACP or academic and career planning, and I actually would probably have Patrice chime in because I know Patrice had talked about this earlier today in terms of the connection to students' academic and career planning, and I think Kelly also talked about. Yes, I think when we think about this plan, we think about this in the big picture of the way we do school and how we're thinking about student support. And we talk about academic and career planning around student voice and choice in terms of who are they, where are they going, how do they want to get there, and what do they need. And I think that we, post-COVID, have lost some of the really good work we've done around academic and career planning that we need to get back. in place outside of it being, within a particular period during the day versus in just the way we're thinking about students learning overall. So in the past, yes, it's been connected to the plan. I think we can continue to think about how all of these pieces are going together. I think at the high school level, we've done. I'm frozen on the screen. At the high school level, I think we've done a better job around thinking about students post-high school planning. And within that is all of their academic and career planning. And what we're going to talk about a little later tonight is where we see implications for our graduation policy that I think potentially are getting at what you're talking about in terms of flexibility. I think the flexibility Capitol High has learned that they have in terms of scheduling and opportunities for work experience, et cetera, are different than what you see in a traditional middle school or even our traditional comprehensive high school. Patrice, I don't know if you want to talk any more about your connections to the academic and career planning.
Yeah, I just, I didn't see.
Or not.
No, it's fine. It's just, I'm like hearing multiple people talking, and so I didn't know. That's all good. So I think that Blair, like you're absolutely right, like having looking at ACP and like how are we including that in there is something that's really important. I will say that we have been really intentional about that work overall at East and more intentional about bringing it into our younger grades, and in particular trying to focus on like, where do I see myself right after high school? What are my interests? Where are my skills? And those are conversations that we're having with students and really trying to find ways to engage them, not just within like what's happening in the classroom, but like where they're seeing themselves further outside of like the halls and walls of East High School. And so I'm excited about continuing that work. I just want to give a shout out to our ACP coordinator, Tyler Kastner, and the work that he's been doing, and our school counselors, because it's been really amazing to see the intentionality there. They have a lot of ideas for moving it forward. And I think that, when we look at a lot of our students, finding ways to engage them and having it be really tailored to what their hopes and dreams are and where their interests are is exactly what we need to continue doing.
Nobody's talking about calendaring. So it's okay if not. I mean, like I said, I can totally appreciate the challenges of this work. That's what, not at the calendaring flexibility part. Totally legit. Thanks.
Board Member Simpkin.
Thank you. I actually have something of an echoing of the questions of board member Eltham. I spend all my day working for the organization that runs all the Head Starts in Dane County. And so I am deeply involved in that world. And so I'm thinking about, early intervention, early supports, and then we send our kids off to kindergarten. And then this plan picks up at, 5th grade. And so I guess I am wondering, I know that there are a lot of pieces that we have in place in our district to support students that are coming in or that are identified in those in-between years. But I'm wondering, is there a benefit that you might see to extending this plan? And if so, what would be that benefit? So, and I guess, and I'm going to add a little piece to that. I'm also wondering about allocation of resources. And if that could add a little more of an emphasis on how we're allocating resources or formalizing plans for the students so that they don't get to the older years, the later years, things like that. In this system, like that.
I will start and respond based on kind of my experience in the plan tonight. I think that while it is not codified in this plan PI 25, a lot of these supports that are similar to what we've been talking about here tonight exist at the elementary level. Our social workers at the elementary level spend a significant amount of time connecting with families, thinking about what families need, where attendance is. Our village builders that we put in place this year are doing that. Our MTSS structure in terms of interventions is actually probably the strongest at elementary versus at middle school and at high school as it relates to academic interventions. There are some risks or implications to consider when you think about how that plan might follow a student. I think there's benefits if we're able to use that plan to intervene better or differently than we're doing now. And I think there's also a risk in that with our earliest learners in terms of what that might be. I'll stop there. I'll turn it over to the team to see if they want to add. I'll go to Dr. Milton.
Sure. So, you know, and I think I was thinking many of the same things that you were thinking, that one of the things that we would want to be very cautious about is that for our younger scholars, getting to school is very much reliant on an adult to support that. And so how are we supporting whole family versus scholar as our scholars get older, they're making more of their own choices. And so I think that that's one of the implications I think about is who and how we're supporting is different based on how much care a child needs at that period of their life to be getting to school. So it's a different approach, I guess is all that I was thinking about, similar to what you shared, Cindy. And I also, I will want us to definitely revisit what's already in the plan that Caroline referenced earlier to determine, is the plan relatively comprehensive when this case revisit what we're implementing and how.
I think the piece that maybe is missing from the plan is that the secondary level, we actually issue this formalized letter for the DPI requirement, and we don't issue that formalized letter at the earlier grades. We do a letter of identification when they need to go to summer school, which is usually at all grades in terms of efficiency. But in the K-5, we don't issue the PI, but the supports I think exist. Mr. Harvey, were you going to join us?
I'm just.
So if I just want to narrow down what I believe I heard, is that making a more formalized process does not necessarily add any advantage to the students, because the systems are already in place, they're just not in place as part of this process. And that there are potential disadvantages as well to other students. Is identified as needing extra support to graduate.
I'll give a very concrete example. Yeah. With our work with ICS Equity that we are doing right now, we've talked a lot about what happens to our youngest learners as soon as they may potentially be showing that they are not on track with reading proficiency. And at that moment in time, we begin to say this student needs an intervention. And many times that intervention, current state, right, we're moving towards desired state, current state, that intervention happens outside of the classroom. When that intervention happens outside of the classroom, I think there are many risks that could play. One, you're pulling a student away from their peers. Two, you could be sending an unintended consequence or unintended message to that student. And we're continuing to to create, these more segregated opportunities. And what we are trying to do now with our new materials and with the kind of trainings around the science of reading is we're trying to say, like, we need more time with core instruction. We need more time in the classroom. We want students to have more time together in collaboration because we believe that is the best place for that learning. We see similar behaviors happen on the behavioral side. And so that's my point around our earliest learners and thinking about what it means to provide supports and how we provide those supports. And then as Nancy brings up, attendance usually has something to do with family things, family considerations at the earlier grades because of the dependency on family members usually for the student to get to school. So that's the part I mean in terms of operationalizing it formally through legislation versus thinking about what we know is essential and needs to happen for our youngest learners without those unintended consequences. Dr. Jenkins, if you want to.
Well, sure. I mean, I think you were covering it. The only thing I was gonna say, just to the whole body here, I think all these questions are really good. But it's a multi-complex. It's one that we should have a separate work session on. Because the PI 25 is only ever giving response to what they were to. This is why we're coming in with the early literacy and beyond, and the connectivity in that space in terms of building our early learners. It's a little sliver of a gap that causes some students to be further behind. And then remember third grade, this is whenever things accelerate. If you're behind, they're not behind. And then it's like getting on steroids in 2 years. We know that we're not doing real intervention across the nation with a 35% efficiency. But in that 4th and 5th grade, because remember it's a rise in the 6th grade. We haven't done any intervention. Now all of a sudden, we're becoming alarmed about what we didn't do early on. And now we have to respond to it because of the predictability of a child arriving in 9th grade. And they're not going to be ready by an expectation, graduating, ready for college or career. So getting back to what we brought up about even the whole thing of scheduling, flexible scheduling, that is a conversation. That's a national conversation, but it's a money issue. Where are you going to put your money? We only get points 6 for 4K programs for teachers. And we're going to reallocate resources. So we just need to stop and just go deeper on it and see what are the real issues. So then we can address them. But don't be so tied into this compliance in the state assessment. I mean, I do believe that you're able to assess. I do. I tell everybody. But I think the way that we're responding to it is causing more trauma on children who are coming to school before they even get here. And now we're telling them that they're less than. So it's a deeper conversation. So I mean to be so long, but that's a really deep conversation. But hopefully we have a conversation.
Well, I want to thank everybody. I appreciate all of your what you had.
Thank you, board member Simpkin, board member Pearson.
Yeah, thank you. So I have a couple questions just about how we're connecting like our community and our partners. So I know that I've heard a lot about how we're looking at family and then how the child is outside of the school. And so how we're making those connections to assist us, especially when the counselor or social worker and Connect Capital and so we do a very difficult job. And then also part of that is I know there are a lot of like extracurricular activities and co-curricular activities that have requirements, whether it's attendance, whether it is grades, whether it is other kind of measures. And if we're saying like, okay, we can kind of work with our students on like, what are their goals, what are their dreams, or what are their aspirations, there's hindrance in kind of facing them and matching them to those things just because of the nature of our outside programs. I don't know if anyone wants to speak to that. Like what are we doing around that and how we can kind of maneuver around some other programs that, you know, that might be there that might be able to assist our students in these applications.
I'll start with the one big thing, and then I'll turn it over to our school people and to and Dr. Hicks mentioned this before, but I think we have many tutoring partnerships when we talk about partners in our schools. And I think there's opportunities to be more intentional about who we're serving in those partnerships, even how we're distributing that resource to schools, which students. So that's just an example around the academic side that I think we have a rich set of partners that provide tutoring, and I think we can be. We can talk about co-curricular and policy implications next, so I think that other question around that specifically is going to be really important. But I'll turn it over to Kelly, to Laura, and to Patrice to see if they want to chime in, especially around how they are leveraging partners or how they see partners at the school.
Well, so that's this year, we've been building community partners that are interested in like launching a campaign around attendance matters. We did this in 2012 as a district with partnerships with United Way and a few other community partners. So we're interested in looking, we're hoping to get support from all of you and from central office staff to like launch another attendance matters campaign. And what our partners are really looking for, partners that we've been collaborating with, are partners who have relationships with our Black and Brown families, our community members. Really like, if you have a problem that's getting to school or you need something, come to us and we'll partner with you with the school. So we have like lots of partners who are already doing work that we want to highlight and like partner as a district with different organizations. We've also leverage like community partnerships with Second Harvest so that all of our schools had like a Second Harvest partnership. So that if you need access to food, you had access to food. We also have interest from joining forces from families, from the county, from the housing department, about how can we launch attendance matters and support as we wrap around the folks with our county or other organizations that feed from the county, especially even like youth justice. Like, how are we talking about attendance within youth justice? So we're really interested in launching that. We are interested in doing a universal launch together this summer. And so when school starts in fall, we're all coming out, we're all saying like, we want you in school. So how can we support and like tailor it to like family home language, tailor it to family needs. So that's kind of what we've been working on this year and launching in the summer. We also have like little different programs at different schools, like Urban Triage with Thoreau, that are focusing on relationships. From the big idea, focusing on how to end habitual truancy with Black and Brown families as well. So we have like key practices that we've seen work really well. And so how do we launch that and expand it district wide? So that's what we've been working with the county in our end truancy with Everett Mitchell's campaign all together collaboratively. For a specific, does anyone want to talk specifics? We'll tell your Patrice.
Well, I just want to tell you, Lawrence, this year would be my first year, focused on building partnerships for academics and career partnerships. Right now, some of the things we have in the works are the underfunded engagements and usually going to find that tutoring that we currently do with Corona, which is one of our one location, so we'll be here kind of messages to make their tutors across the three locations. Talk about the urban pre-op partnership that we come in contact with, and I'm really excited about. We're also talking about the Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. They do have quite a few resources for our Atlanta students. Well, all of our students, but they want to focus on Atlanta students and our students specifically. We do have that is a great intern that so quite a few businesses in Madison. We talk about the food pantry. They want to partner with us because they did hear about our culinary program. The partnerships are in place so that we can kind of focus on both the causational and correlational reasons for some of the efficiencies that we've seen in the district. They're in place, and we're just excited about getting into action next year.
For our applications, it's really a lot of them. we're taking students over to get to set up the breastfed over Ryan, so that they have those opportunities for those breaks for themselves too. What's next, right? What's next time you block us, and be able to have those space where you feel like you find those support to have somebody, because there's something, how do you start to work with yourself, how do you the other groups, you have a number of students with experience process, right? And fortunately, sometimes that related to access to other support, so we have support to their and some of those setups as well. We're still partnering with the foundation, so I'm really supporting the positive things building there, and right when things take time to right building those, but also those partnerships and working with groups outside of us who don't understand our.
Probably the last thing I was going to deep in the research, co-curricular academic, one of the barriers that board members in addressing policy, remove the costs. That's a barrier. I'm telling families all the time and everywhere. If we want our students to improve social emotional and further the academic, allow them to participate in co-curricular, particularly when we say the arts. So we are arts centered. We really are. There's no reason that we should, when you go look at go to any of the music theater, any of them, I want you to look at the demographic. And not just even racially, but socioeconomically. Who can afford to be in these particular arts that we have? Then you start looking at hockey. Who can afford to do hockey? You know, and when you remove those barriers, students feel like they're part of school. They can be cheered for instead of doing the cheering or having to go do other things. So if we look at co-curricular, look at the cost, evenly distributed across, it's instant, like improvement of students feeling a stronger sense of self. And that's what I would say. That's something that I hope that we really consider looking at that. How do we reduce the cost of students to participate? And every student should be able to start. I'm going to say with the arts, instrumental, vocal early, so they can have a better lifetime.
I would just want the board to look at when we're looking at what you talked about, where like you have to meet certain requirements to become them. I would really just be mindful of the board when we pick the policy of like habitual truant versus chronic absenteeism, because the only difference there is someone called and excused. And so that's an issue, an equity issue across our district, across our nation of like, when we say unexcused, you can't attend if you have this many unexcused absences, that's a huge barrier we're putting in place because other students can be excused and still be part of that. So I just want to put that in when you have a discussion later about that conversation.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you.
And then the other is just, a few months ago, I was, one of the retreats, we heard, doing some work with YWCA, we heard from students directly about their experiences in middle school at the time. Or their experiences just with school. It kind of goes back to what Dr. Hicks was mentioning about belonging, and how our students are relating to school. And some of the things that we're seeing, some of the data that we're seeing is directly related to belonging and how they feel about education. I mean, in a host of other things, right? And so I don't know, like, have we, I'm sure you have, but I just wanted just to ask, like, how are we connecting like our work with that? And I know that is its own thing, and I know that we are all working together on trying to revise a better plan. But how are we working in conjunction with this? And then also, have we been talking with students and families? And I know that we're doing the connection work, but tracking what our responses are from families and why they're not coming to school, or why they are not yet, why they're not coming. And some of that's I think a big piece that going to school is giving you responsibility that students in this system. And we saw it come out of it too, after we had to start to see the questions. We were looking at the students who still can't make it to 9 o'clock, start 9, many years of everything else. I think we need to make sure that people are safe. The students who are the main caregivers in their homes. The students who are the main caregivers in their homes that have to directly contribute or need to contribute for their own selves to find something else that's safer. We have significant mental health struggles that are impacting students' abilities to be ready to be in person. And we have sometimes a feeling like, why am I bothered doing this? It's kind of a lot for us. And we can have the relationships, and I can tell you right now that I know the last day that everyone might be sick is at school. And it breaks my heart, and also it feels good, right? But we have families that are crying and phone to us too about wanting so people for their students to come in and they don't want to get in trouble. And we built the system in the country, right, or as like educational system around compliance with when you come. Coming to school right now is helping keep my family in their home, or helping keep myself or other people fed. And so if I can go do that right now, then I will go do that. And I will figure the rest of that it out later.
We'll kind of piggyback off what, Ellie said, I think my vision for the Army is, beyond the freshman year, expose our kids to both academic and career inspiration. You know, to the point where they get the training they need in sophomore, maybe junior year, and by the senior year, they're out earning money. Whether it's in the form of internships or full-time employment, you know, I still focus on the academic piece and the college of choice. Then they have something there, you know, to get accepted into the university of their choice. So I would say just being a lot more deliberate about not necessarily us picking a track for them, saying, hey, college or bust, you know, or you know, you're gonna study HVAC or whatever it is, but explore, we need to expose them to both. So that they'll have the knowledge to kind of make the decision and earn a living way. I mean, you know, earn a living, earn some money while they're also in school. To give them a lot more options. You decide to be attendance, I think we'll see the attendance more crazy. I think we'll see a lot more family communication support. And that's part of the vision.
Thank you. Then this last little piece kind of adding to that is that similar to what Michelle was mentioning earlier of when students are, we work with students, we get them to the point where now they're on track and they are now not exhibiting some of the indicators that got them onto the list. Like, what is the work around ensuring this? Because it is very easy, you know, anything can happen in that moment to kind of push them back. And so like, what is some of the work that's being done around that? And I don't know if it's necessarily the work that some of the team is doing because they're working for this, you know, but just.
I'll talk about it from like a big picture standpoint, couple hours ago. No. I think that, I mean, Capital High is different because that is like their plan. And so there's always constant opportunities to wrap around the students. When we're thinking about our other schools, I think that sometimes students are constantly receiving those wraparound supports and services regardless of this plan. And I think that's one of the things we wrestle with in our school district is there's so many different like plans and compliance components. We're trying to just help schools figure out how do you do school and how do you support students, regardless of what certain requirements say. So some schools I think are doing a great job. And then I do think some schools, depending on the number of students, Patrice spoke about it beforehand, they will do their best to support students, but then also thinking about who else needs to be part of this support plan in order to make sure students have a point of contact. We talk a lot about trusted adults, so how are we connecting students to a trusted adult? So I think there's a continuum, I guess I would say, in terms of where those wraparound supports happen, regardless of the student is on a plan. I think sometimes it's a little more stretched the needs of the school and where you have community partners and other people that providing resources and. Thank you.
So, that's been that.
So I am actually gonna ask moving forward that we limit how many people respond to questions, because it's taking on average about 15 minutes per board member for us to move through questions. I'm gonna turn it over to you if you have something you wanna add to that last one, but then board member Vanderbilt is gonna come after you.
It's not gonna be very short. Just one of the things, we just identify one of those best practices that are working, and how do we replicate them in terms from a systemic. So instead of having one-offs, we say as a system, we approach it this way.
Thank you. Board member Vanderbilt.
I want to lift Laura's comments because I think that excellent point. We need to put more teeth into this plan if we're going to help people more, in my opinion. If right now the plan we have is a good start. I think we just need more of it. So that's my opinion, unless Laura, I misunderstood you, which could very well have happened. The other part I wanted to uplift is Savion's on how having it codified into policy. I think that's actually quite a good idea. So we finally have everything in one spot. That way our parents can find it, our scholars can find it, our teachers can find it. And then we're actually going to be, this district doesn't like doing the status quo. In this case, this would be going beyond the status quo, including students who we're not required to yet. But you know what? We should be doing it anyway. Thank you.
Thanks, board member Vanderbilt. I want to thank our staff for participating in this conversation, and I want to highlight that it was really helpful to hear from folks who are working directly with our students and our educators this evening. I want to say that I don't have any questions. I think we've covered a great deal of questions, but I do have a singular concern related to slide 11. So Jesse, if you don't mind putting slide 11 up, every single area of plan criteria over time has risen with the exception of teen pregnancy, which, you know, I think is something we could feel good about. And honestly, I was a little surprised in the wake of the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that we are seeing a decline in teen pregnancy. My concern around that represented decline is that it identifies a singular student for this year.
You speak up, Nikki can't hear you.
I'm sorry, Nikki. My issue with the slide 11 is that we're seeing parenting or pregnant teens decline. However, in the most recent data, we have one student identified. That's incredibly like both stigmatizing, and it feels very obvious if it is a singular student that we're identifying that student. So my hope is that that's a okay.
I have more students from that year, just for parenting that were on this list.
I was wondering if there's an accumulative of both parenting and pregnant students versus parenting students. It would seem like that would be a larger number. So I guess
I typically averaged at least 5 each year that I've been at Capitol, that I've been on the list of being a parent and something else,
so 5 would still go beneath the threshold for
Just to
identifying.
press below 7, so I'm gonna follow up with our data team and find out, and we'll also just poll this if that, because this isn't Word docs. I need to follow up with our data team to find that out, because we're pretty good about suppressing anything less than 7, so yeah.
Yeah, and I would say it's challenging enough to be a teen parent. You don't need your actual data as part of a board presentation. So I'll accept that was an error or mistake. It's great if the numbers are declining. I think we need to be cautious about how we protect the confidentiality of our students in areas that are as sensitive as these, and in all areas, to be honest. So there's another one that goes down to 5, but I think we may want to, in honor of our own standards. Moving on, we're gonna dive into the conversation about co-curriculars.
I'm gonna thank our school staff. Thank you so much. Give them 1 second so that they can. I really appreciate the time.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back anytime.
you're fine.
So I think.
All right, I am going to kick us off around the conversation around co-curriculars, and then I'm gonna turn it over to Dr. Hicks and Dr. Ebby. I think this is a great segue from the conversation we just had when we think about sense of belonging, when we think about policy implications, and when we think about budgetary implications. Tonight is really to give an update on where we are with collecting baseline data, and also to get a thumbs up from the board that this is still a priority metric that we want to continue with beyond this school year. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hicks. And Jesse, can you go to the next slide? And I feel like I'm.
You're not screaming, it's good.
Thank you, everyone. So when we talk about co-curricular, that Cindy stated, is more than just an activity. It's what it does for our young people in terms of who they are, how they see themselves, as well as their academics and the impact that it has in those areas. So this year it was our priority to establish disaggregated baseline for co-curriculars, participation based upon race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, disability status, EL status, and gender identification in this 2022-23 school year, and increase participation for secondary students by 5 percentage points for 23-24. So the first thing we needed to do was really identify where is our starting point, right? Where is our starting point? And as we continue to do the work, we also often know that this work is grounded in research, and it's stating that major participation in co-curricular activities has been found to have a statistically significant and positive influence on the GPA, high school class rank percentile, and performance on the ACT exam, and that was in 2000. Slide, please.
Another one?
Yeah. So the definition that we are using for co-curricular is that co-curricular programs are activities sponsored by a school that are not part of the academic curriculum, but are acknowledged to be essential to the overall learning process in the school. And those co-curriculars could happen during the school day or after school. While athletics and performing arts of music, speech and debate, and theater are the most common co-curricular activities, other programs offered by state associations include academic competition, journalism, robotics, chess, visual arts, and many other activities. Next slide, please. So what we have done to date. We have developed and refined an infrastructure to collect the participation data. It looks a little bit different at the middle school level than high school, because we are how we were defining co-curriculars previously. Created guidance for consistent rostering across schools, conducted quarterly data quality assurance practices, communicating value of co-curricular participation and associated data collection, and reflection with central office leaders and school-based staff. Critical in order to find where our baseline is. We've met with principals and shared the definition of co-curriculars, and we have helped them identify co-curriculars that occur after school and during the non-instructional part of the school day. There are a lot of things that can occur during the school day that are outside of just core content that you can actually engage scholars into the entire school learning process. Also, encourage principals to engage in the school and outreach to students and families, and to share co-curriculars that are offered within the school. And as we continue on, you can go to the next slide. Jesse, we are also, we're gonna stay in the area of all middle and high school. So if, based upon our middle and high school co-curriculars, 48% of all of our scholars are involved in some kind of co-curriculum. 29% of our scholars with IEPs are involved, and 46% of our African American scholars are involved in co-curriculums. We are not yet at year end. This is just where we are right now at this point in time. And we're still collecting data on what we're seeing in its totality, because it's newer at middle school than at high school. Next slide, Jeffrey. I'll turn it over to Dr. Effie.
Good evening, school board members, Dr. Jenkins, and the Madison community. Thanks for having me here. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things we've been thinking about to improve, especially when we look at our data, after talking to principals, our scholars at the school. Some of the things we really need to lean into is to ensure that we have access to transportation for all our middle schoolers. Making sure also just that we have consistent co-curriculars across sites. So lifting our scholars' voice in that. What is that? What are those co-curriculars that really engage them, and making sure those are available across all sites. And then some of the things we have learned this year is some of our scholars participate in activities outside the school. And we want to learn more about those and think about, can we incorporate some of those things in our co-curriculars? And then our principals are already working on how they communicate about co-curriculars to families, to our scholars, using multiple ways such as newsletters, but also doing outreach, talking to scholars during advisory, doing e-announcements, all kinds of ways to make sure we're reaching everyone. Go to the next. And again, our next steps, you heard Dr. Hicks talk about our real work this year around establishing the baseline data around co-curriculars, and thinking about which of our scholars are participating and how we lean into that baseline data as we think about co-curriculars. We're also looking at how this would be part of the school improvement planning in our schools. And as we continue to improve our work, what actions are we going to take to improve in being very school? So now, I'm going to turn it back to the green.
One last thing before we go into a discussion, I turn it over to board member Muldrow, is just going back to what we talked about right before in terms of policy implications. So there's an athletic policy that has implications. There's a no admit policy that potentially has implications when we think about access to either participate or even observe co-curriculars, and then budgetary implications, which I know we started some of this conversation on Friday. So just thinking about that. And then the last thing that I would indicate is what we're learning in that data is just inconsistencies across the board. And this year is really about building that infrastructure, that if we believe this is a priority to improve student outcomes and sense of belonging, social emotional learning, then we need to ensure that we have some of these components in place to be able to launch this next year. I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much. Board members, any question or discussion? Board member Blair?
Sure. The first is just a really in the data side where it shows participation, if you've attended MSCR for middle school or rostering at a high school extracurricular activity. Do I understand that this year a student who goes to like a lunch club would be reflected in this data, because it's all rostered. Okay, cool, that's awesome. Well done. Okay, so then. Then I have two, I guess I have a comment / question and then a question. The first comment is that I find it disturbing that there's no mention here of the people who staff the co-curriculars. Like. Children don't just like put themselves in clubs. I mean, you know, at the high school, sure, they can, sometimes, but, often you need an adult supporting that work. Even if it's literally just, opening the room and supporting the students. And so I have questions about what are the staffing implications about this? Are there considerations for if we want really, really robust, well-attended, well-done co-curriculars, are we gonna pay people to do those co-curriculars, or are you gonna do all of them? Right now there are, in my understanding, there are some that get paid and some that are volunteer. Some that are incredibly labor intensive, right, that can be traveling all over the country with students, and some that are much milder. Like ones I've done, where it's kind of just like, okay, I'll unlock the door and supervise you while you do your thing. But I would love to see, as we build this, attention paid to like, what are the human resources required for this, and how are we supporting that to be really good? That's not a question, I'm sorry, that was just a comment. And then my question is about consistent co-curriculars. When you think about that, I heard you say, Dr. Evie, like the ones that students really love. So is the idea that like the really popular ones would be consistent, but that there would be lots of variation beyond that, or that it would be completely consistent?
So we are looking for consistency across middle school, but right now that's something we're thinking about, because in some of our middle schools, our scholars are involved in creating some of those after school kind of activities. So that is something we need to think about and really wrap our head around before we define what consistency is.
Thanks.
Board Member Nichols?
Related to the slide that talks about this being a district priority. I know it says this year, the goal is to establish a baseline disaggregated based on race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, disability status, ELL status, and gender identification. I want to thank you for the first data slide that gives us overall participation and students with IEPs. I'm just curious if you have disaggregated data for all of the other ways that students may be identified, and are you seeing any trends when you look at the disaggregated data about who actually is participating and which students, based on their identity or kind of life experiences, may be furthest from these opportunities?
So I'll talk about what we've done today. We have not fully disaggregated yet because we are still collecting the data. We're still working with schools on rostering, which is why when Dr. Hicks opened up, it indicated a kind of from September to March. We have learned in just this round so far that schools were coding differently. So we were even getting inconsistencies in terms of who had which co-curriculars. Once we get to the end of the year and our co-curriculars close out, the disaggregation will happen, the analysis will happen, etc.
Okay, great. That's very helpful to understand. So related to that, regarding school improvement plans. How exactly do we imagine that a goal related to co-curriculars would, I don't know, be shaped or influenced in the school improvement planning process? When you also have schools focusing on core academics, you know, and I'm sure many other things. So I don't know if there's anybody who can cover that.
So you can approach it two ways. You can approach it by the motion, or you can be an extension of academics. And so our job is to give students guidance on what is the best way to achieve their goals. But in terms of improving the fund, that'll be the best way to really get out of the culture and to address it with our stuff.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Harvey. Can I just do a follow-up? Okay, so if the district-wide goal after establishing an accurate baseline is to then increase participation by 5 percentage points the following school year, 23-24, I would assume you need every school, like, helping to contribute to that district-wide goal, right? So schools would be setting some goal of increasing their participation, at least at the secondary level. So I guess what I'm wondering is, like, are we envisioning that schools are explicitly setting a participation goal? Okay. Okay. And would we see that in the 23-24 school year school improvement plan?
Yes. Well, so it's very important. I don't think that this baseline is actually being the plan to move forward, how we go forward.
Okay.
For 2024.
Okay, and are we, so budgetarily related? If our goal is to increase participation, is the goal to increase participation with that which we already have? Or to increase more opportunities for co-curriculars and thereby hopefully attracting more students into co-curriculars, or is it both? Because I don't know if I've seen anything in the budget that would help me see that we're hoping to perhaps increase access and participation in co-curriculars.
We'll talk about it in kind of two different approaches in how we've been thinking about it. So to answer the question, yes, schools will set a goal, but they need their data to make decisions about that. And the first part that we have talked about is just access, in terms of who is currently participating in your existing co-curriculars and who is not. We have many co-curriculars, especially at the high school level, that exist through clubs in the school day and out of the school day. Dr. Jenkins mentioned one example about fees that potentially are a barrier to certain co-curriculars. So we're first trying to get access, period. Then we need to focus on dosage, like what is the dosage in terms of co-curriculars that actually has that tipping point to improve academic outcomes and sense of belonging. After that, then we want to start to grow co-curriculars. I don't think next year is the year for growing co-curriculars. We have infrastructures in place through MSCR where we're able to leverage that as the vast means of a co-curricular structure for middle school that could be absorbed within current costs. At the secondary level, we're trying to also figure out what is consistent and where at the high school level, what is consistent. So I think next year is going to be about access with potentially little budgetary implications. I think beyond that, when we think about where we want to go, there will be considerations for budgetary implications, whether that is waiving student fees, whether that is adding co-curriculars that have material costs, whether that is transportation costs. But I don't think that that will be next year's plan. Next year is first having a better understanding of who is accessing and who needs to be able to access as our student.
Great. Can I have one last follow-up? All right, thank you. So on the slide that is around areas of improvement, you mentioned access to transportation, particularly at the middle school. You know where my head is going. We have a brand new transportation company. I'm going to come back to that bullet. You talked about consistency in the co-curriculars across sites. And so those two bullets alone raise for me equity. we've heard many, many times about west side schools, maybe having a different kind of offerings than perhaps our east side schools, and that's not me pitting sides of town against each other, but just parents and families and students themselves talking about vast differences in offerings. And so one, I'm wondering, like, what are our thoughts around how you provide consistency or guide schools to have more consistency? And then I would love to hear a little bit about access to transportation. Like, are we thinking this is after school transportation, or did you just say a little bit more about that at the middle school level?
So yeah, the access to transportation, is really about after school and really, this year it hasn't been as robust and it had a lot to do with, access to, transportation for buses. Big started up, and so right now, we're working with NCR and transportation to make sure that those things will be, in place and available for scholars next year. And well, the other question was.
Oh, the other thing, this is for anyone, just when we talk about consistency across sites. I'm just curious how we think we might do that. How would we provide guidance to schools about consistency when oftentimes it is certain staff who are kind of taking the lead, and so you may have some staff at one building that, you know, can support students, and then maybe that's not available at another site.
So in that, again, this is also running with, our NCR and our site directors and communication and collaboration across the band at the middle school. The goal here is to just ensure that access is available to all scholars. In middle school, opportunities are developed based upon scholar interest, right? And whether it be whether it be a staff member who are, I'll go back to this board member Belko around staff are critical to the function of a robust programming. But also we have, not volunteers, but parents or whomever, community members, Whitewater, whomever come in and do coding clubs and all the things of that nature. But being able to have high quality, rigorous, robust programming across middle school. At an interest level and engagement that they have. So if there's a coding club in one school, let's try to do coding clubs across, the bands. I'm not saying that it can or cannot happen, but the expectation is that access and opportunity will be available to whoever wants it. But it's going to be critical, especially at the middle school level, to have ongoing collaborative communication amongst the different sites. Site directors, which they meet regularly now already, but really, and I'm just, for example, I look at what might be done with the coordinator at Cherokee Heights and all of the robust scholars program there that they have and the family events that are occurring there, right? So how are they communicating across the board and having the expectation that this should be occurring or the opportunity should be available in all schools, and it shouldn't be dependent on, the director and the interest level. And so it's more about across the site, like how are we collaborating and communication and teaming? We do that with sports because our schools play each other in activities, but how do we do that around just generalized activities or access to like chess clubs, debate, all of those kinds of things, but making it more collaborative, cohesive, instead of just one-offs here and one-offs there.
Well, thank you. I hope, I just want to be clear that my questioning is more just trying to better understand where we're going, and I am definitely, I feel like as a student in the Madison School District back in the day, co-curriculars were a huge incentive for me showing up, Even when I didn't want to show up to the academic classes, I loved my co-curriculars. So I know that they can be a major draw for so many students to like stay in it all day long. So yeah, I hope that we can continue to refine. And the last time you all were in front of us was probably August or September. And you all were just talking about you were gonna begin collecting the baseline data, so I would just show some appreciation for you all being on that journey, so thank you.
Board Member Silken? Thank you. I get really excited when I think about co-curriculars and how they intersect with equity. And not equity necessarily geographic equity, which we really obviously have identified we need to work on that, but also providing opportunities for our students who really need it. And so I just want to plant a seed that we have within our community. We have some really strong STEM-based programs that cost money, that are not easily accessible for all of our students. And bringing some of those into our schools, and we call out robotics in particular, which there is a really robust local, state, and national robotics structure that also has a really strong social emotional component to it. And I think it would be incredibly impactful for us to find a little funding and bring that in starting at elementary school, which is when it starts, and then having that go across. We also have these tremendous opportunities for computers and coding, which perhaps those are offered in some schools, but I know they were offered in the school that I'm most familiar with. And so thinking about those STEM people and how we can move forward for our kids whose families can't just sign them up and send them on somewhere after school. I think that could be really impactful. So I'm just planting a seed right now. I really appreciate that we're thinking about this. Like that.
Board Member Castro?
Thank you so much. So I have two questions. There's been some recent research and reporting done by the Center for Disease Control about participation in youth sports, especially for students from students who are experiencing poverty are participating less and less in youth sports because of privatization. So what has enrollment in our youth sports look like on the middle school and high school level? Are we seeing similar trends here in Dane County? And then my second question is, I'm wondering if there's any cost estimate on either fundraising or our budget resources on eliminating fees for some of these activities.
Board Member Castro, I'll start with the first question and then I'll turn it over. I think the research and the fee structure for youth sports in Madison is one of the reasons why we believe co-curriculars and a robust set of co-curriculars within MMSD is critical. Anyone that knows youth sports in Madison, it is very difficult to participate in most programs if you do not have money, and there are few scholarship opportunities for students. We do not have a fully operationalized middle school sports program. MSCR starts and does their best under the infrastructure that they have. But what we see is that already creates a barrier for students as they go into high school based on who has had access to youth sports at a younger age and where students matriculate into sports in high school. So I would say that that research is mirrors our city and why we believe investing in and building out co-curriculars, probably beyond middle school, but we thought we had to start somewhere, and right, so we only started middle school and high school, is critically important. that goes even beyond what Dr. Jenkins mentioned in terms of waiving fees for students once they're in our programs. We have not done a full cost analysis to my knowledge in terms of what that would look like to waive those fees, but I'm turning to Dr. Jenkins to see if he knows that, or Mr. Harvey, but I don't believe we've done that yet, but our budget team could probably easily.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Okay, well, I'll just say this to you in terms of, we have to do a deeper analysis in terms of the budget implications, but don't assume that there are not budget dollars already there. All of our schools, and when I talk to Ms. Heinrich from the Madison Public Schools Foundation, and when I'm looking at their budgets, they have dollars year in, year out that they don't spend for co-curriculars or accelerating academics participation, all of these things that have also been COVID related. That's when just a general start. And not every student will need this as well. And we would have to look at it a little bit further, but in terms of when you reduce the figure, these typically go back into various schools, and there's an equity issue with that for individuals. Because when they don't get all of the funds and their ability to fundraise, that's a great question you're asking. But it's time now to just look, see what would be the investment, not the expense. When you look at the investment, you're going to have to look at not only our scholars, but the adults who are working with them. And it must be highly, not only just articulated program, but well managed. So the co-curricular individual that we talked about, the budgetary which we keep pushing it back. But when you go robust, someone must be responsible for managing all of this. That's why at the middle level, you have an infrastructure with MSCR right now. That could just be added on to with some deeper thinking. You could get there with some efforts for next year to impact. Next year, the middle schools across the country are challenged with our students not having enough to do. Period. It's not just inequities in our district, it's middle school, take care of elementary and high school. So this would be a great thing, and I just want to say to my colleagues, you all did an outstanding job of working to get it to this point today. And now it's just the big, special news. Talk about this.
Okay, thank you.
Board Member Pearson? Oh, I'm sorry, Board Member.
Sure. I have two thoughts. No, I have one thought, which goes back to scheduling, which I guess now you all know a pet issue. Because it's really constraining for adults and kids who work in schools. And I do think kids work in schools too, they work so hard. And I know that there are other school districts that do like an intercession type thing around co-curriculars. You're not here, so you know it too. Maybe I don't know. You know, but it's so powerful, and what can be so cool about that is rather than having, I'm thinking about, okay, it's me, I'm the teacher who's trying to support a co-curricular on top of my regular job. And it's just, it goes on forever, right? And then we're getting the semester heats up and my club is still going, and the semester heats down and my club is still going. And I'm thinking about how many more people we could get potentially invested in doing this type of thing if it was spent down. If it was supported within the like annual arc of the school year. Rather than being like, okay, I have to commit to taking on a year-long co-curricular. So like, can I work with 2 other people in my orbit on a week-long co-curricular? And how that would, whether or not that would be, right, I don't know, you're the one who can think about it and figure out, but maybe that would be something that would feel, especially if it's gonna enter the SIT planning process, more manageable. Just because of that, obviously you're the expert, so we're gonna see some, but I echo all of that.
Board Member Pearson?
Yes, I guess I'll just go on to the question. How we're connecting, because we kind of waited until this part, just how we're connecting. The community, partnerships to kind of assist us in co-curricular areas, supporting the students.
So you're gonna ask the policy question. I'll start. I think when we decided to kind of set baseline data and figure out something to work from in terms of who was participating in co-curriculars and what were they participating in, we limited for this baseline data that you'll see at the end of the year, we limited to those staff members that work with our students within our school structure. I think one of our areas of improvement that we have heard continuously is how do we go beyond that to better leverage our community organizations, to identify how we can work in tandem with community organizations on greater access to co-curriculars, and connections to co-curriculars. Our Summer Arts Academy is a great example of doing that beyond the school day where we're really leveraging our partners. So I think that could be like part B or phase 2 of this work, but for right now, when we were trying to figure out something to begin with, when we defined it, it was our staff working with our students under the MMSD umbrella to begin with.
And just no disrespect to everybody, I just want to bring context to. This is co-curricular. This is as important as the classroom. This is our classroom where some of our students gain the great skills and confidence to walk back through the door to learn the English, math, science, or whatever. And Patricia Ashton at the University of Florida talks about these necessary relationships. That's what really turns that classroom magic on. The students get to know their high quality teacher. And so when we think about it, let's think of it in terms of this. This is not an add-on. This to engage our students, so they feel a sense of belonging, and the staff actually get to know it. So if you're doing small activities or large activities, when you mention like a week, there may be some students want to collect caps for a week. That could be an organization. I mean, that could be an activity. There may be some students participate in band or or a large sport, small sport, but don't devalue anyone that stuff because that's what they need.
And I would just name that off the top, there's 4 potential policies that have implication for exactly what Dr. said. We have an athletics policy. We have a no admit policy. We have handbook implications in terms of what Blair brought up in terms of how we pay staff to engage in co-curriculars and which co-curriculars get funding towards it. And then the 4th is the policy for fees. So I just putting it back to thinking about and if this is going to be a district priority metric.
And then just my last question was just, it's another equity question. It's a little different from everyone else's questions, right? In the sense that Madison is a very arts like focused community, right? And there's a lot of access to art. However, when you look at the access of art that is not like centered in who the artists are, there's not a lot of diversity in that itself. Okay. And I mean by who we are elevating as artists and the top performers and whatnot in Madison. And so for us, it's like the equity question is, even if we work with some of these partners who don't necessarily have a diverse group of people within them, how are we then working with our families to say, hey, you have access to this program or this program, and trying to help, I guess, do the like sharing back and forth, right? Because as a person who grew up in Madison, as an athlete myself, there are times in which we would go in certain communities or participate in certain activities, and again, you're the only one. And so, or our team who is mostly predominantly Black we'll go into play other teams or other spaces, and there's not diversity there, so it's like, we don't really want to play those teams. So I guess that's kind of like my question. I don't know if we can answer that today, but I mean, it's another way to kind of look at equity, how we can ensure that our kids are able to feel comfortable in going to spaces as well. So even if we're getting a partnership, it really wouldn't matter if we're not getting the full extent of our students.
Well, no, Pearson, I'll just give you one thing, I'm sorry. It's not even just with our partners, it's in our school. This came up Saturday when we had the parent meeting, Black community, right? We're not gonna get every adult look like every child. You mentioned arts. Arts is one of the most diverse things that we can be a part of. But we stay on very old, singular arts perspective that does not include the culture of others. I'm talking about in our regular, in our schools, I'm not even talking about outside. So when I go into a band class, choir class, beautiful, I mean, just, we have some of the best in the world right here in our school. But often, I'm asking how diverse. And so I've actually talked to a couple teachers about that. You know, when I mentioned to them, I'm like, hey, you know, some change or whatever. It's all of our responsibility to make sure that we're keeping a very diverse curriculum in-house and in our partner experiences. We should ask, what will you do to guarantee that our children can see themselves in this experience? And what I've found when I have a conversation with people, they are like, oh, you know, but sometimes we have to make sure we're pushing that envelope as well, because Madison is an art city, and I love Wilson City, right? Music out on the yard at the house, but you know, and they have done a good job. I have to give them bringing more and more diversity to the table. So let's push it together, all of us.
Board members, thank you so much for your questions, and thank you for emphasizing the importance of co-curriculars. My only real comment on this is one that I really appreciate that we're focusing on this. And two, I think that we use the word equity very frequently here. And I sometimes think that our sense of what equity is actually a little bit departed from the reality. And so when we talk about kind of uniform systems of making sure that every student at the middle school level has access to recreational sports and what those sports are, or every student at our middle school level has access to a GSA. I think about then my own experience in working in after school and working in co-curricular activities, and also in having my kids engage in options. And I think so often that those things are based both on the interests of the students and the capacity of the STEM. And so really looking at what our schools need and what determines what they need, right? Every school maybe doesn't need a unicycle club, not to throw unicycle under the bus, right? That is a club that's taking place in some of our schools and not all of our schools. And I think like making sure kids and families have what they need is different than making sure everybody has the same thing. So in some spaces, you might want to think about like, what does it mean to have access to theater? What does it mean to have access to theater that, you know, does historically Black plays or does plays in Spanish? I hope that we are not generalizing our students' opportunities in a way that eliminates the very unique skills of our staff and the very unique needs and interests of the young people we serve. And with that, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
No, we have one more. item.
That's right. Thanks. Go for it. Like that.
Don't do equity then.
All right. And thank you to my colleagues with the co-curriculum. So I will go through this relatively quickly. We right now are proposing potential revisions to our policy 3540, which is our graduation policy. You go to the next one, please, Justin. Our graduation policy has not been revised in depth since 2016. We had a little bit of this conversation the other day. Currently, if we're talking about Carnegie Credit Unit, students need 22 credits to graduate. Outlined here is a little bit of what those credits equate to and how that happens. In addition to that, we do have part of our policy that indicates that you can graduate through a portfolio model as well, which is a non-Carnegie Credit Unit option. Can you go to the next slide, please? As we are digging into thinking about considerations for our policy, I just want to uplift a few things. One, we are deeply thinking about how our policy reflects our vision and our desires for our students to be truly college career community ready. What does that mean in order to do that? How does the policy have the flexibility necessary for students to realize our graduate vision that has 9 competencies, realize their path to post high school and any one of these 6 paths, and at the same time maintains rigorous standards and rigorous expectations. So that is a lot of what we have been talking about. We've also been talking about what is absent in our current policy. How do we support students that have had interrupted schooling and or newcomers to our school district and enter into our school system at something like age 16? So those are some of the considerations that we have in place right now as we're thinking about our policy revision. Next slide, Jesse. So what is our process? I actually am super excited about that. I feel like this is a great process that we're engaging in to think about a policy revision. Not the only process, but a process. We have gathered a cross-functional team of some central office staff and then school-based staff. We have principals in the space, we have counselors in the space, we have other staff that actually touch that policy in a variety of ways. We've brought them together to start to dig into to understand what has gotten in the way currently and what is working well with our policy. Those individuals are going out to different stakeholder groups to gather more feedback. That means students, that means families, that means roll alike to the people that they are currently working with, counselors, social workers, etc. We're also looking at a couple of case studies. We're taking a couple of students that have had very different experiences in MMSD and looking at how the policy has helped them become college career community ready and earn a diploma, and how maybe the policy has had some barriers or implications for that. We're doing a couple of case studies. We have also started to do a crosswalk against the Neola policy. So there is a graduation policy with Neola. So we're looking at that as well. What makes sense? What's the same? What are we thinking might be different? And last, we're trying to look at the current policy and tease apart, as you know we are doing for many other policies, what might be in there that's more procedural versus what is actual, more of the black and white policy. That's our process right now. Next slide, Jessica. So what is our tentative timeline? I want to kind of get a thumbs up from the board tonight if we want this to continue to go forward and you want to see a potential revised red line policy. But our cross-functional team was established in April. We're gathering feedback in April and May and probably into June. We're going to review all of that for considerations for the board in terms of what we would bring forth as a revised recommended policy, and then a potential approval of the policy at the June board meeting so that that policy could go into place July 1st for the following school year. All tentative. Jesse, next slide. That is it, and I'll turn it back over to you, board member Muldrow, for any discussions.
See it with a client for me. All right. Questions or discussion related to policy, board member Vanderwill.
Sorry, you'd think after 3 years I'd figure out how to unmute. I still haven't gotten there yet. But very, very simply, I'm fine with all except one thing, and that is I still believe policy and procedure needs to be together. You could have a policy, but how it is done is essential, and where it can be located is essential. Right now, we have policies where there's a total different procedure on how something is carried out. And that's not easy for people to find. I worry about scholars finding it. I worry about adults finding it. And so I think that if we're going to separate them, which I really don't think we should do, but if we do, please put an index of where it can be found. It would just make the entire process simpler. That's it.
Thank you, Board Member Vandermillen. Board Member Nichols.
Thank you. Okay, so I just pulled up the policy. And it looks like it was last updated in 2020. And before that, in 2019.
Can I share what was updated with both of those?
Yep, you must have been reading my mind. So I guess what I'm wondering is, based on the last revisions, when we were, I don't know if those were pandemic related, updates, but yeah, I'm just curious if you could foreshadow. Has there been a change in state requirements or, are we really trying to go for something different in this policy?
So first, I'll answer the first part. When the revisions happened in 19 and 20, they were specific to other policies that are listed in there. So one of those was age of students, and we made a change to the policy for age of students. We also made a change to the policy for English learners in terms of their access to schooling that is tied to that. The other change was in relation to high school credit while in middle school policy that we made changes to that is also listed in this policy. When you read through this policy, it has connections to many other policies. Anytime another policy changes, there's an implication for that. So those were the changes that were most recently made in the policy. In terms of legislation, I'll say there are a few things that have changed that we have not fully reflected in our policy. One is that students are able to earn half of their credits through a competency-based model now if they are in a comprehensive high school. Under the traditional high school model is one, and we haven't fully had that reflected in our policy. We have a graduation via portfolio that we made changes to, but that doesn't fully codify. We haven't fully realized that out of our students that have an IEP and that process, which I think is a well-oiled machine. The other is that I have heard through all of our feedback is there are some limitations to our policy that are preventing barriers for flexible options for our students, such as, and I'll explain what I mean, such as being at Madison College for half a day accessing the Fire Academy. When you have that happen, some of our requirements have created restrictions. For example, we name in our policy, you must take English 1, you must take English 2. DPI says you must take 4 years of English. We have many English offerings. We need to take into consideration, is that current language a barrier for students to access? The other is equivalency. We haven't looked at that piece and looked at what do we believe is equivalent coursework. For example, if you're taking half of your day at Madison College in the Fire Academy, then does that equal X requirements that are in our graduation policy that creates more flexibility for our students to truly be college, career, community ready, earn what they need in terms of tangible things in hand prior to graduation that's setting them up better for success. Few examples, I'll pause.
That's super helpful. Thank you. Can I ask, I don't know if this is related or not related at all, but oftentimes the board is approving shortened day agreements for students. And I'm not saying that all of those students are in high school, but are there any, I guess, limitations that we should be considering in a high school graduation policy for students who may need a shortened day agreement?
Sure. I think that is an excellent question. I do want to separate, though, I mean, in terms of your question about consideration, what should be coming to you all to approve should be situations where a parent has something outside of school, has worked with their scholar to line up something outside of school. It could be that they're involved in high-level sports. It could be that they're involved in some high-level music program. It could be that they are, engaged in something else that the parents feels is valuable enough that not being in school for that time is worth it. And so then I think in terms of our graduation policy, we should consider, just like Cindy just said, if those activities should count for credits in our schools. So if you are participating in something, if you're a really good hockey player, that's using that as an example, then do you need to take physical education in school? If you are in a statewide band that performs all over the country, should you have to take as many electives as our other scholars? But I think we do also, in terms of codifying the policy, want to make sure that what's not coming to you is when a scholar has an IEP and they have disability related needs, that sometimes our staff are not as well informed of our own policies as they could be, and we need to continue that education. So they'll tell a parent that they can ask for a shortened day based on disability related needs, and those should all happen through the IEP. So that the discussion can happen about what's going to be missed and how we can make that up and how we can support continued learning. So just, I think, two different things mixed in there with your question.
Okay, great, thank you. So this helps me think about, so you have a cross-functional team. So the cross-functional team, after listening, in May, will start to think about a new language that could be recommended, for a policy update.
Correct. I told them tonight is a great moment in time for us to decide if we are going to continue with this kind of work group and bring forth the policy for recommendations in June. And so as of right now, yes, that is our plan. I also wanted to just make sure from a board perspective that based on the policy group that you have, that this isn't impeding upon that this is still the direction we go. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so are you looking for board members to say yay, nay? Or are you all?
Yeah.
Yeah, but just before you do, let me just make sure I bring something in. Be careful about short name. That subject should be taken very serious. And people can do a workaround to get to a short day, just because a scholar has an IEP or a scholar is an Olympic athlete, all of it should be considered. It should be taken lightly. Seen over and over with people, a lot of short days, and it's not what they can reason for the intended. Sometimes it's just to make things, I will say, easier for whoever in the environment. You need to be really careful about just getting pushed for that.
I think this is super exciting. I'm sure I'm not surprised. I think this is really exciting. I would just be looking for making sure that cross-functional team is attending to when this happens, what are the instructional implications? And then what are the resources that would be needed to adapt to those instructional implications?
Castro.
Thank you. Yeah. So in terms of what you've asked for us, yes, this is still a priority for me, and I assume the board. Just general comments on that. I'm still, as Board Member Nichols alluded to, I'm still a little bit very much disturbed by the deficit language used in the state language, but I understand that's more of an issue with the philosophies from DPI. In our policy or practices, I am interested in looking at a variety of ways students can demonstrate competencies outside the traditional avenues. And that is my 2 cents.
Thanks. I want to second what board member Castro said, say I appreciate that we are doing this work, and I think, I want to highlight board member Nichols' question. I think I got so much out of your responses to those questions, in terms of how important this policy work is, and the different areas we really need to think about. And then I just want to emphasize that, what Dr. Jenkins said around shortened schedules, when I worked, at municipal full-time, I came into close contact with a lot of students who had shortened schedules as a security guard. And I eventually asked for the list of all of those students, and every single one of those students was an African American boy, at that time. And so I think that we need to be really wary of the implications of this kind of policy work. And we need to be honest with ourselves about how certain practices have been leveraged in relationship to certain populations of youth. So thank you for highlighting that, Dr. Jenkins. And thank you for your questions, Board Member Nichols and Xavier. Further questions or discussion? Board Member Vandermeulen and then Board Member Nichols.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Perfect. All right. My issue is I am for relooking at the policy. What I'm not for is the shortened day scares me. I've seen that abused way too many times as an attorney. In fact, 3/4 of my clients at one point were on shortened day. About 3 of them deserved to be on shortened day due to severe disability. That was 3 out of 22. So that seriously worried me. The other issue is that I know that shortened day is an IEP issue. I know the IEP team, we are legally required to find what is in there. And I get that. And I understand that on parents. But what we need to do is to show that there are other options that they can still provide support. My other issue, I'm worried on the IEP portfolio. I really am. I know it's supposed to help students with disabilities. And I'm worried about is with the understaffing currently, what's going to happen is that we're going to assign the portfolio and these students aren't going to get the education that they deserve. They're just going to be told to finish whatever's in there and that's it. And that worries me because this is a shortage throughout the country on special education teachers and on SEAs, and that worries me. So I'd like a little more specifics on that in the next version, and that's all I need. Thank you.
Thanks, Board Member Vandermeulen. Board Member Nichols.
Yes, I hope that I didn't commingle the conversation with graduation requirements and short day. I don't know why it came to mind, but I was just thinking it's like a standard thing that we're approving and then just thinking about people graduating. Anyway, I would say I am in support of moving forward. So I think it's great for us to be looking at the policy and thinking about what is what would be a better way to update and to consider different ways for young people to be able to show their competencies.
Further discussion or questions? All right, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. So moved. Can I get a second?
Second.
All those in favor, aye. Aye. Motion carries 7-0. I think we'll take a 5-minute break between this and the next meeting.
Is it the same room or a different room?
It's a different Zoom.
Thank you.